Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Get Your Questions Answered, Winning a Creative Work Fund Grant. For those of you who are returning to Foundation Center's webinar, welcome back. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm so glad you're joining us today. My name is Ganga Dharmapa, and along with my colleague, Elizabeth Zavada, I will be supporting today's webinar by managing polls as well as collecting questions you ask along the way and posing them during the Q&A. And I'm joining you from San Francisco, and Elizabeth is in our New York office. Before we get started, and especially for those of you joining us for the first time, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something similar on your screen. By default, you're listening in using your computer's speaker system. If you would like to join over the phone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. In the handouts section of the interface, you'll find a PDF copy of the presentation as well as the 2019 Creative Work Fund guidelines. And you can find that as two little red icons with PDF in the pane, the audio pane. And you'll have the opportunity to submit questions by typing in your questions into the questions chat pane of the control panel. And you may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. I'll be collecting these and we'll address them during the Q&A session at the very end of today's presentation. We'll also be sending up a follow-up email tomorrow, which will be including a link of the recording as well as the handouts associated. So this webinar will be recorded and you will be getting a copy of the handouts as well in your email. All right, so I would like to turn over the controls to our presenter, Frances Phillips, so she can display her presentation. As she takes the reins, I'd like to introduce her. Frances Phillips has been managing the Creative Work Fund since the program's inception in 1994. She also serves as a program director for the other arts grants at the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, which manages the Creative Work Fund. Prior to joining the fund, Frances was executive director of Intersection for the Arts, a multidisciplinary arts organization in San Francisco. In addition to her foundation work, she is a published author, poet, book reviewer, and instructor in the creative writing program at San Francisco State University. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Frances. Frances, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you very much, Ganga, for that very lovely introduction. And thank you to you and Elizabeth and your colleagues at the Foundation Center for making this session possible. I really appreciate our partnership. And while I'm thanking folks off the top, I want to thank the board of the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, which has voted to continue supporting the Creative Work Fund, and also the Performing Arts Program at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which has awarded us a generous grant to continue the program. I want to make sure everybody understands that the heart of this presentation is about answering your questions. So yes, I do have a brief introductory overview in case you want a little refresher reminder. I know that I kind of forgot everything I used to know over the holidays, and then we'll really focus on you and what you want to know. So what I'm going to cover today in this kind of quick introduction is just what is the Creative Work Fund. I'll give a brief refresher on the basics. And then, as I said, I want to answer questions that you have. And as we're getting started, I'd love to know who's participating on this webinar. And the Creative Work Fund grants are based on a partnership between an artist and a nonprofit organization. So we're kind of curious to know if more artists are on the line or others who work with in the nonprofit sector and what your role might be. So the Foundation Center is opening a poll now.
All right, so we are starting our first poll question, and this is really to get a sense of who's joining us live today, as Frances mentioned. You can select any of the options on the screen, so you can select an artist, a representative of an arts organization, a representative from another type of nonprofit organization, a consultant, and a volunteer. And you're welcome to share with us in the chat. If none of these categories apply to you, feel free to chat that in, and go ahead and select the appropriate response, click submit. All right, so for those of you who have not responded, go ahead and click submit, and we're going to be closing the poll in just a moment. Okay, so this is really interesting. So it looks like about 45% on the call today are artists, 21% are a representative of an arts organization, 24% are representative from another type of nonprofit organization, 7% are consultants, and 3% are volunteers. Francis, would you like to share your initial thoughts or reaction? Looks like we have a lot more artists on the call today.
Yeah, that's great. And as I mentioned, these grants are all about a partnership between an artist and a nonprofit. So I'm glad that both artists and nonprofits are represented in the webinar. That'll give us a kind of rich perspective on what people need to know. And I also wanted to say, and this will come up in a moment, that one of the things that's distinctive about the Creative Work Fund is that any kind of nonprofit organization can partner with an artist on these projects. So I'm pleased that we have arts organizations and many other types. So that's great. So I have another question for you in the next poll, and that's about geography. This is a geographically limited program, focuses on the 11 greater San Francisco Bay Area counties. And I'm curious to know where you might be participating from.
All right, so you should be able to see on your screen another poll, and please select one of the following. You're located in which eligible county? So please select either Alameda, Contra Costa, or Solano, Marin, Napa, or Sonoma, Monterey or Santa Cruz, San Francisco, San Mateo, or Santa Clara. And we'll give you a moment to think about this, and please click submit as soon as you are picking your response. All right, so we are going to be closing the poll shortly. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and submit your responses. Okay, very interesting. So we have 32% coming from Alameda, Contra Costa, or Solano counties. About 43% are from San Francisco. And it is an even split between Marin, Napa, or Sonoma, and Monterey or Santa Cruz. And San Mateo and Santa Clara have 9%. So about 8-9% from Marin, Napa, Sonoma, Monterey, Santa Cruz, San Mateo, or Santa Clara. But the majority are coming from San Francisco, with 43% of you on the call today, 43% from San Francisco, and 32% from Alameda, Contra Costa, or Solano. Francis, would you like to share any thoughts or reactions?
Well, this data kind of reflects what we've seen in the last few years. Even though it seems as if San Francisco is dominating, it's not dominating the same way it used to a decade ago. And I think this is typical of the Bay Area and the rising costs in the city centers of Oakland and San Francisco, that more people are moving further out in the region and around the country, the counties. And really pleased to see some range of participation in terms of geography. We'd love to see some more strong applications from counties that are underserved by other philanthropic opportunities. So this is great. Now, this is going to be my last poll. One more question, which is, we were assuming that because this is about getting your questions answered, that you would have made some effort to get to know something about the Creative Work Fund before you participated today. And that's doesn't mean you have to have done that by any means, but we're kind of hoping you had. And we did present a prior overview webinar on the 12th of December. We also have a pretty comprehensive website, and lots of people learn by word of mouth. So curious to know what got you here or what you learned in advance before jumping into this webinar.
Okay, so we're launching our final poll. Before this webinar, you participated or heard about the December 12th webinar. You visited the Creative Work Fund website. You learned about the fund from a friend or a colleague, or you are new to learning about the fund. Feel free to select one of the following. And we'll give you a moment before we close the poll. Okay, so we will be closing the poll shortly. If you haven't selected, go ahead and do that now. All right, closing the poll, and let's see what the results were. Okay, this is really interesting. So a majority of people visited the Creative Work Fund website, 54%. About 18% of the listeners today participated or heard the December 12th webinar. 28% learned about the fund from a friend or colleague, and 43% are new to learning about the fund. So it's kind of scattered, but it looks like a lot of people visited the Creative Work Fund website. Many people were on the webinar on the 12th, and a lot of people heard about this for the very first time. So,
Okay,
Frances,
great.
any thoughts?
Just that please, if you have just been learning about the fund from a friend or it just came to your attention, please don't be shy about asking whatever you want to know when we get into the Q&A session. That you don't need to be an expert by any means before you jump in here. And I thank you for letting me know that, because it helps me to gauge my answers to your questions. So great. So now I'm going to jump into the heart of this. What is the Creative Work Fund? Creative Work Fund awards grants of between $15,000 and $45,000 for artists to create new works through collaborations with nonprofit organizations. And in doing so, I want to emphasize 3 themes. It's supposed to be a genuine partnership between the artist and the organization. So even though it might initiate as the artist's idea or might have initiated as the organization's idea, we want to get the sense that they truly are coming together and want to work together. Also, and the collaborative process together is leading to the creation of new artwork. So these are not grants about education or art therapy. They're really focused on artists making new work. This particular fund was created in the early mid-90s. It was in response to the culture wars that were going on in the country at that time, and a big reduction in support for artist fellowship grants that used to be given by the National Endowment for the Arts. So paying artists to make an artwork and collaboration are what we're looking for. So a couple of things about who's invited to apply. Every application includes a lead artist, and there can be several artists involved, but one person needs to put their nose out in front as the lead, even if you're working as peers, which is fine with us, and a nonprofit organization. You're going to be creating the application and doing the project together. I mentioned earlier during the polls that any kind of 501c3 nonprofit may apply. The only exception to that is we won't consider applications from other private foundations. We also have awarded grants to religious organizations that do not have 501c3 status but are essentially nonprofit. And we've made some grants to branches of government that are public agencies. We emphasize 501c3. The idea is a public benefit entity. The artists have to live in and the nonprofits have to be based in 11 Bay Area counties. Every year, we invite different broadly defined art genres, and this year we're inviting applications from traditional artists or visual artists. And I should correct myself briefly to say that at this time, for our March 1st letter of inquiry deadline, we're only inviting traditional projects featuring traditional artists or visual artists. In December of 2019, we will be making an open genre application opportunity to the Creative Work Fund where we invite artists in any artistic genre category to apply. So if you find you're on the line today and you don't really consider yourself a traditional artist or visual artist, you might still want to hang out with us because it could be relevant for you to come back at the end of this calendar year. I mentioned that the grants emphasize making art, creating art. And I also had mentioned earlier that this grant emphasized support for artists, and the deal with the Creative Work Fund is that 2/3 of any grant is supposed to go to pay artist fees and artist direct expenses. And that can be payment to your lead artist, and it can be payment to additional artists, and it can cover things like equipment needs or materials and supplies or rehearsal space. Now, I clicked the button a little faster than I meant to, but the 11 Bay Area counties, we stretch to the north to Napa and Sonoma, and to the south to Santa Cruz and Monterey County. The reason for these counties is these are the places that are supported either by the Walter and Elise Haas Fund or by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So again, and at some point in the project, it has to be shared with the public in one or more of these counties. It doesn't have to premiere the work that you're creating in one of these counties, and it can be presented as a work in progress. It doesn't have to be a completely finished piece, but it could be drafts, but there has to be some kind of public sharing. So we always get a lot of questions about what we mean by a traditional artist. And in general, and some people immediately go to an oboist or a ballerina. We're using the same definition for traditional arts that's used by the Alliance for California Traditional Arts. I've summarized it here on this slide. Some of the important features of a traditional artist and who fits this category are these artists are deeply rooted in and share their community's standards of beauty, value, history, and sometimes language. Often they are not learned in institutions, in academies or schools. They're learned through a family or through a community setting. They're passed by a mentor or a grandparent to a younger artist. They may be produced individually or collectively. And that means, you know, this definition, in some ways it's narrow, but in some ways it's very broad. So for instance, you can see here that one of our prior grantees was the native California basket weaver, Linda Yamani. We've also supported other artists who practice traditional crafts like Mia needlework or Filipino weaving. And there's been a whole range of African dance and drumming, music from Syria. So many different forms can fit in this category. But when you're thinking about genre and the Creative Work Fund, the category you choose is appropriate based on your lead artist fitting the definition. So let's say Linda Yamani had wanted to create a film about her basket weaving practice. She could have proposed that a collaboration with an independent media company. She would have been the lead artist collaborating with the filmmaker and the director of photography and so on. The end product was a film, but that to us would be a traditional arts project because the lead artist was a traditional artist. At the same time, she could do the kind of thing that she did, which was to create baskets, really extraordinary traditional baskets not made for a long time in California. So our definition of visual arts is that the visual arts include artists who have experience in painting, sculpture, photography, printmaking, a long list here on this slide that because you can download it, you don't need to hurriedly scratch down the list. But what we don't include here is video and sound-based installation artists or artists that are creating new genre time-based work. So if you are a filmmaker or if you are a radio producer or if you create video for installation exclusively, you don't really fit into this category because we also have a category for media arts. Now, if you're a photographer who also creates video, you do qualify this year. And remember, it's your background that makes you fit this category or not. And many artists fit more than one of our categories. So be aware of that as you decide whether or not this is for you. Again, applying this category means the lead artist fits the visual arts definition. This is an image of a project that Victor Cartagena did with MACLA in San Jose. There was also a mural on the exterior. There was an installation indoors, and there was also performance involved in the presentation of this project. So the big question is, or a big question might be, have there been any changes in the Creative Work Fund? This program's been going since September of 1994, and there really have not been, except that the grants are a little bit bigger. For a long time, they ranged from 10 to 45,000, and they've gone up to 15 to 45, or 10 to 40. They're now 15 to 45. No, you should not be shy about asking for the maximum or close to the maximum. But we were acknowledging that the costs for trying to get by in the Bay Area for both artists and nonprofits is greater than it used to be. So we were able to make a little bit of an increase. What does it take to apply to the Creative Work Fund? It's a two-step process. There's a letter of inquiry that's going to be due on March 1st. And then if you were invited, you submit a more detailed full proposal. You also must apply online, and we have an application portal. There's a very first step before you start writing your letter of inquiry. Both the lead artist and the nonprofit organization need to go to the Creative Work Fund's application portal. You can see the address here, and fill out a very brief quiz that indicates whether or not you're eligible to apply. You don't get an instantaneous answer because the quizzes are reviewed by human beings, not by algorithms. So don't watch your email for a response. Sometimes it goes to spam, so be careful to watch for it there too. But it takes usually a day or two before you hear back from us. And people sometimes get confused at the webinar. We don't mean for it to be a barrier. Please feel very comfortable with calling us if you're running into any snags with it. Generally, once you're in there, it's great. And one of the things that we try to make possible through this application portal is the artist and the nonprofit can work on their application as a team, as opposed to only one person being able to write the application. The essence of your letter of inquiry is you're going to provide us with information about the project idea, about the collaborating artist and the organization. The narrative is up to 10,500 characters. That character count includes spaces between words and punctuation. So remember that if you're writing on another platform and then cutting and pasting into our form. Sometimes people have stumbled on that. And if you're thinking about length, that's roughly 3 single space pages of writing to give you a sense. There's also a summary budget. This is something that's relatively new. We introduced for the first time last year. And you're invited to upload a resume or bio of your lead artist. And that's only your lead artist. At the letter of inquiry stage, please don't share work samples, links to websites, or embedded images. That will be very important if you're invited to the full proposal stage. But at this point, with the letter of inquiry, we're interested in a good idea, a really authentic, genuine sounding collaboration, and a partnership where the artist and the organization are excited about working together. Deadline, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Friday, March 1st. That's not Guam time or Hawaii time, it's Pacific Standard Time. And so remember that eligibility quiz I mentioned earlier? Make sure you take that at least several days before the deadline, because otherwise, if you take it on March 1st, you could not hear back from us in time to apply. So word to the wise, do it early. And you can do it at any time as soon as you know you intend to apply and work on your letter later. I want you to know that this particular webinar is all about questions and answering questions, but this is not your last opportunity to ask questions. Our phone number is here. I'm Frances Phillips speaking. My colleague Faiza, who's my program associate, is also very knowledgeable about the fund. We are happy to hear from you and talk to you about your ideas. If you're having technical problems with the website, our tech team of Suki O'Kane or Marcel Marania will be better suited to answer those. And frankly, if you ask those questions now in this particular session, I'm probably going to ask you to email me after the event and have them get back to you. But don't be shy. We know this is a competitive grant. We want you to do well, and we want to be helpful. And now I'm going to turn this back to Ganga because it's time to hear from all of you.
All right. Thank you so much, Frances, for that information. We are now going to begin answering the questions that the audience submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the question pane in your attendee control panel. There are about 81 people here today, so feel free to keep submitting questions. And Frances, my first question for you to ponder is something that you discussed a little bit, but this is a question from Brittany. Can you give an example of what a strong collaboration between an artist and an organization looks like? What a weak collaboration might look like? And as you ponder this question, I'd like to share some special offers with the group. So for those of you on the webinar today, if you're in the Bay Area, we invite you to join us on January 28th for our in-person training, Mastering Collaboration, Stories and Insights from the Creative Work Fund. Oftentimes the fund is asked what it means by collaboration. This is kind of connected to the first question. And frankly, it's not one thing only. A good collaboration can take many forms. So we invite you to come join us as we explore the question of what makes a good collaboration through conversation among artists and nonprofits who produce masterful partnerships and artworks. And we also invite you to join us for a webinar. This is for anyone who wants to join virtually. And this webinar is called Catalysts for Change, Non-Governing Boards as Pipelines for Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Leadership. And this is going to be on January 31st. Learn how these types of boards can help you reach emerging leaders and add to your nonprofit's overall diversity by fostering the support of new donors. And don't forget, you can attend any of our live webinars and you'll always get a recording so you can watch it on your own time. And with that, I'm going to return back to Frances. Frances, what are your thoughts on this question that Brittany asked around strong collaboration between artists and organizations? What does that look like? And what does weak collaboration look like?
Okay, great. Brittany, this is such a great question. And I'm glad you raised it because it will be on many applicants' minds. As mentioned in the description for the event on the 28th, there isn't one right way to do it. But remember that these projects are based on the creation of an artwork. So you don't, a weaker collaboration might be one in which an artist creates an artwork, but the interaction with the nonprofit organization doesn't really happen until the work has already been created and the nonprofit steps in to help put it in a gallery or present it live to an audience. So a stronger collaboration might be one in which the constituents of the nonprofit organizations inform the content of the piece. Or we've had some situations where organizations have created committees that provide feedback on various works in progress, or instances where an archives contributes information to an artist's research. I feel like I'm kind of stuck on this research idea, and that's not the only way to do it. Obviously, when you have the artist to arts organization kind of partnership, sometimes you might have, say, a traditional dancer who wants to work with a particular set of traditional musicians who are part of an organization, and they're bringing their talents together to create a work. So process is really important with this fund. And it's not that we don't care about an exciting product, we really do, but the idea that your working process involves a back and forth and time together that could be either consistently week to week or maybe focused in particular retreat times together. But it's about the making it together and influencing the making as it's developing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francis. So this question is from Sati. I am fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit. Will I be eligible to apply?
An artist can, well, yes and no. So Sati, an individual artist still has to collaborate with a nonprofit organization. If that nonprofit organization operates using a fiscal sponsor, that's fine with us. But a partnership, you're not just trying to get nonprofit status through artist plus fiscal sponsor relationship with the Creative Work Fund. It really has to be a collaboration with a nonprofit that is going to work with you on the piece and do more than administer the grant. So yes and no. Maybe your fiscal sponsor is an entity that would also be a good intellectual and artistic partner in this. And in that case, that might work. But it's the idea of collaboration is more than a fiscal sponsorship relationship.
All right, great. This question is from Rosalie. How established must the lead artist be? Can they be emerging?
Another, I'll try to stop saying about every question, oh, that's a great question. But that's a great question, Rosalie. I would say, to be honest, most of the artists who have received Creative Work Fund grants have been kind of mid-career and have had strong slides or strong work samples to share and something of a record of accomplishment. But the fund has made an effort to talk to its panels. We do use peer review panels about keeping an eye out for projects with interesting emerging artists. And almost every time there's a couple of them in the mix. So we don't have any rule about point of career. The age range of Creative Work Fund recipients has been 19 to 92. We've had some people very famous, as I said, most people mid-career, and we've also had emerging artists.
All right. Thank you, Francis. So this question is from Tamara. Do you consider a photojournalist an artist? In other words, would a project with a photojournalism focus qualify?
Oh, that's always kind of, that's a nuanced question. And the photos would be judged based on artistic merit, artistic quality, and so photos that were made for the, oh boy, this is, I'm going to struggle with this a little bit. I would say that, for instance, in literature, a different panel, a different category for us, we do invite literary writers, but we don't invite journalists. So there are many photojournalists whose images, whose photographs have very strong artistic merit, and it would stand up in our process. Photos that were exclusively made in a journalism context might not be taken as seriously by museum curator types, gallery types, as the work of other artists. But I think there's an opportunity for photojournalists to be in the mix. It's just that you would want to show some range of work.
Got it. All right. So this question is from Miroslav, and it is a clarifying question. Does your definition of visual art include digital work, or is that in a category of media arts?
Okay. It could include digital arts. It is, as long as the kind of the nuanced difference for us between visual arts and media arts is that the media arts are time-based work. So there are moving images, changing sound, that kind of work. But many artists use digital media to create pieces that are not so much time-based, and you could very well qualify, and many artists do both. So you probably qualify. We have put things like websites and games and new genre work, frankly, in the media arts category. So I hope I've now not just muddied the answer to your question. So please feel free to bounce back if I've been confusing.
All right. Thanks, Francis. So this question, and a couple of these are nuanced questions. So let me know if you would like me to do some more of the general questions. But this is a question from Shizu. Is a book project about Dia de los Muertos exhibitions eligible as an art project? And the plan is to work with SOMART's Cultural Center and with many of the participating artists and staff to co-create a book. The lead artist is a literary artist and a visual artist who's produced about 5 books, all with visual components. So it's a book project about an exhibition.
Got it. Okay. So the literary art, the question is really, does the lead artist have a strong track record in the visual arts dimension of their experience? And then I guess the other question is, in the creation of a book, it is potentially really collaborative if you're really getting in there with the artists to interact with them about how they would be represented in the book. If there were some back and forth, I would say, I mean, I love books. I happen to be a writer, so I don't want to disparage them in any way. But something that was done that seemed kind of like this is valuable because SOMARTS has this rich history with Dia de los Muertos, and this would document that history. That would be less exciting to the Creative Work Fund than one in which the lead artist is really interacting with both the organization and the artists who are going to be presented in making the book into a really dynamic representative form.
Okay, got it. And this is a quick clarifying question from Miroslav. Is the Creative Work Fund the same as Hewlett 50 commissions? Is it different?
The Creative Work Fund is different from Hewlett 50 commissions. The Hewlett 50 commissions were launched a year ago, and they've now made 2 rounds of grants, and it's an $8 million initiative. And the Creative Work Fund is also supported by the Hewlett Foundation. So I do want to say, if you get a Hewlett 50 commission for a specific project, you would not then be a competitive applicant to the Creative Work Fund. And similarly, if you got a Creative Work Fund grant for a specific project, you would not be eligible for a Hewlett 50 grant if it were the very same project. So they might support the same artist or the same nonprofit organization, but not the very same project. And they're 2 different programs. I think the Hewlett 50 will be announcing its next round in a few months.
Okay, got it. Good clarification. This question is from Michael, and the question is, can Kinetic Art get funded through this grant? I work at the Pacific Pinball Museum and build kinetic art sculptures from recycled pinball parts. The sculptures are visual, auditory, and sometimes interactive.
Yes, I believe they could be considered in this genre of visual arts. And what I'm not hearing in your question, but which you may have a clear sense of, pardon me, I bet some of you have had the cough. I'm just recovering from the cough that's going around, so I apologize for that. Is who your nonprofit partner might be. But yes, I do believe that they could be considered sculpture and considered in this category.
Got it. All right. And this question, this came up a few times, is from Sharon. I'm having trouble finding the right nonprofit partner for my art project. What do I do? Where do I start?
Oh, yeah, that's tough. Well, first of all, the Creative Work Fund doesn't try to make matches for people. I know we've been asked a number of times, who should I work with? We also have found over time that stronger partnerships generally are not the ones where people rush out to find somebody and end up applying with an entity they don't know very well. So I would, you may very well have done this already, but I would look at 2 things. One is, where are there people you know whom you trust and you like working with? And might that be a pairing? And the other question is, Where is there a nonprofit organization that is working on the issue or the materials or the kind of work that you want to do? If the intellectual kind of project match is strong, that can overcome the we've never really worked together before challenge. But I will say situations where there is something of a past of even a little bit of a working relationship of, you once taught a workshop there, or you have worked with their director in a different capacity, that human element and knowing that you two can work together well, that's pretty important. So I want to encourage, not discourage you, but I would really think about what's in your network already, and also what makes sense in terms of the very piece that you're proposing to make.
Great. All right. So this question is kind of a nuanced question. Many of them are nuanced. So our nonprofit, this is from Clarissa, our nonprofit 501c3 is our legal institution, and they apply for all of our grants. However, our art piece would be presented on our university. A lecturer or faculty member is the artist. So it's kind of owned by the university, it seems like, and going to be hosted on the university. Does this artist, the lecturer or faculty, qualify as the lead artist?
Okay. I'm going to answer by talking around your question a little bit, for which I apologize, and you might want to bounce back if I'm missing the point. It is true that for this project, the nonprofit organization and the artist are supposed to be coming together for the sake of the project. And the lead artist is not supposed to be an employee or board member of the nonprofit organization. I didn't say this in this abbreviated webinar, but that is a Creative Work Fund rule. Now, when you're looking at a university, if it's a big institution, I'm just going to take this off the top of my head, not to try to lead you anywhere. But let's say an artist who teaches on a part-time basis in the drama department wants to collaborate with the botanical garden, and let's say that's sponsored by the university. And so they're not an employee of the entity that's also part of the campus. We likely would permit that to be like a worthy partnership. Another thing I want to say, which is a little bit nuanced, is that if the lead artist has been a lecturer or occasionally teaches at, has taught a workshop every other year at an entity, we have permitted that to be an okay partnership. But if somebody was consistently, regularly teaching in a specific department and they wanted to collaborate with that very same department, that would not be appropriate.
Got it. That's a good clarification. Thank you, Frances. And this is just a quick question. Would theater performance art qualify?
Not in the March 1st round, but in December, when we have another deadline and all genres are considered, then it would qualify.
Okay, great. And this question came up a few times. Most of the people on the webinar today are in California, but there are a few outside of California. Are there similar organizations, this is from Megan and Dina, similar organizations or funders that fund art and artists outside of the California area that you want to mention? And if not, that's okay.
Sure. I'll mention a few. And of course, because I don't work there, I can't give you a sort of a depth of response to the question. I know that Creative Capital, which is national, is inviting proposals at the beginning of February of this calendar year. So I would check out their guidelines, and they are multidisciplinary. And as I said, they're national. I often encourage individual artists to look at the New York Foundation for the Arts has on their website a section called, and now I'm blocking what the name of it is. I believe it's called Art Source. And it's a national directory that you can search of grants and opportunities that are exclusively for individual artists. So there is also yes, it is called, actually, I take it back. It's called NYFA Source, NYFASOURCE. And so many of those grants are small, but not all of them. And as I said, they're all about grants and awards that are exclusively for individual artists. So that might be an interesting category or item for you to take a look at. There was a question earlier about the Hewlett 50 Awards, and those are to California nonprofit organizations, but the artists can be from anywhere. So if you have a California organization you're interested in working with, they have already awarded a set of grants in music and now in theater, but they have yet to do media arts, traditional arts, and dance. So that will come up in the next few years. You might look at what the CERDNA Foundation is doing. I believe that their social justice, actually, I take it back. The Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, they have this social justice fellows program that I think is really compelling. I'm not very clear about what the application process might be at present, but I'd take a look at that. So those are a few ideas I have, and keep asking. Others can lead you to other thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Frances. That's a good list and good referrals for sure. So this question is from Jamaica, and it's a specific question. My grandfather was the music director for Glide Church in San Francisco, and he just passed, and I'd love to pass his information on to the church in an effort to fund a program in his memory or provide another avenue for music succession planning and talent identification. Is this the right fit for that idea?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry for your loss, and that music program is really fantastic and worth celebrating. This particular grant might contribute to that desire on your part if you had an appropriate lead artist and if you were kind of kicking off the effort with making a work that celebrated that history. But it's not going to be a source for creating an endowment or a ongoing program per se. It's more about making an artwork. So if that were a way to kick off your plan to protect and advance that legacy, it could perhaps help you on that score.
All right. Thank you, Frances. So this question is from Barbara. I'm completing a first-time feature documentary, and I'm working with top musicians, and it has been to an international collaboration. It's been an international collaboration by artists, and we're all committed to funding, working together with a nonprofit to support women's education. So this is kind of a couple of parts. We have a nonprofit in mind. Are there any pointers on how to work with the nonprofit in terms of the subject and genre? The film is just about to be completed. So they have a nonprofit in mind. It's an international collaboration of artists, and they just want a couple pointers in terms of if they fit, and the film is about to be completed. I hope that makes sense. And this is from Barbara.
Yeah. So I believe your question is not so much about the fit to the Creative Work Fund, but more about advice on the partnership. And because I'm not hearing that there's a lead artist who's a traditional artist, I'm not hearing that there's a lead artist who's based in the Bay Area. I'm hearing that, sounds like a really exciting project, but it's something different. Well, one piece of advice, a couple pieces of advice. One is that I would make sure that really good collaborations are based on trust. And that's so easy to say, and it's not an easy thing to just manufacture. But I would make sure that you interact with the nonprofit several times before you make some sort of formal relationship deal. I might see if there is a small way of working together before you jump in with both feet, because often you can learn from having some kind of initial experience. Like, let's say you were willing to show the rough cut to a select group of people who were related to the nonprofit to tell them about the project, and the nonprofit was willing to produce that with you. That might be a small thing to test and just sort of see how it goes. One other thing I would mention is that one thing that most often goes wrong with projects is when there is a single individual at the nonprofit who is really passionate about the project, and that person changes jobs and leaves. And then the artist has lost their champion in the organization. So I would make sure, if you can, that if you're going to work with a nonprofit, that you have a relationship that goes beyond one individual.
Got it. All right, thank you. And this is a question from David, who is a consultant and who fields this question a lot. If you were to apply in the category of a traditional artist for, say, for instance, a Asian musical genre, it's not named here, but you don't identify ethnically as that community, are you still eligible to apply as a traditional artist? What is the definition of Creative Work Fund's definition of traditional artist in particular?
Great. This is a great and naughty question. So it really depends on how that artist has learned, mastered the art form, and how that artist is seen in that musical community. So if that person is recognized as someone who is carrying the tradition, then it's possible that that person not be from that specific cultural heritage. And I have an example of a prior grant awarded to the artist J. Van Arsdale. He's an expert in Japanese woodworking, Japanese joinery. He is not Japanese. He went to California College of the Arts. He, through a kind of quirk of experience, happened to go to a presentation from a master artist of Japanese joinery from Japan. He apprenticed himself to that artist for some 20 years. And when that artist passed away, that artist kind of passed the mantle of sustaining the practice to Jay. So his recognition in that community and his having spent the time and effort and devotion to emerge as really a master of that art form reassured our panel that he was appropriate for a grant in traditional arts. So it's possible.
It's a good answer. Thank you, Frances, for that clarification. This question is from Tracy. Can these funds be used for works that are presented in parts, multiple parts, for example, 2 exhibitions?
It is possible, Tracy, for the works to be presented in parts in more than one exhibition. Just remember that 2/3 of the money is supposed to pay for artist fees and artist direct expenses, and up to 1/3 of the money, and that's the minimum, and up to 1/3 of the money can go to pay for the nonprofit organization's related expenses. Doesn't give you a whole lot of production money. So these grants really kind of emphasize the developmental gestation stage a bit more than they emphasize the make a big presentation stage. We do want the work to be shared with the public, but just kind of keep that in mind. But there's no problem with there being more than one presentation.
Okay, thank you, Francis. So this is a direct question from Susanna. If you are an artist pursuing art alongside another career, so you are gainfully employed, but you are also an artist, can you still be eligible to qualify for a grant if you collaborate with a nonprofit, but you have other funding through a career?
Yes, absolutely. We believe artists should be paid for making art, and it's possible that you will want to take some time off from that career, I don't know if it's possible, depending on whatever that career is. But yes, absolutely, that's not a problem.
All right. And this is another direct question from David. Would a project using large-scale projected light and sound qualify as visual art?
David, it could qualify. A number of projects that we've considered that have been based on projections have been projections of moving images, and we've considered them in the media arts category. But yes, it could, if you have a background as a visual artist, what you do doesn't matter so much to us as what your background experience as an artist has been. So yes, that could be an appropriate use of funds.
All right. This is from Susan. Would you consider a jazz vocalist creating original material in the style of a historical jazz figure, a traditional artist?
Susan, that's a challenging one. All this artists kind of working in jazz blues traditions kind of fall on are they better suited for performing arts or for traditional arts? I guess, I would think about two things. One is, how did that artist master the art form? If it was through a kind of mentoring, apprenticeship, community setting of developing it, then that kind of points to traditional arts. The other thing that I would consider is, when we put together a panel in traditional arts, we include artists who are traditional artists. We included people who are folklorists and otherwise experts in particular cultural communities, and we include ethnomusicologists. So imagine, is your artist better judged by someone who's looking at it through the perspective of ethnomusicology, or are they better judged through a contemporary curator of a performing arts series? And, there's nothing wrong with kind of taking your chances one year and coming back in another category in another year. But I would ask, because the application requires some effort, I would ask myself those questions.
All right, great. So we have one more question, and this is from Jamaica. Where can I find examples of successful letters of inquiry or even full proposals from previous years? Is there a place that I can see examples of collaboration and success from the past?
Jamaica, because we're a private foundation, our documents are private, so I'm afraid we don't share successful letters of inquiry and proposals. So I am sorry on that front. I will say that if you go to the Creative Work Fund website, there are 250-word descriptions of every single project, more than 300 projects that the fund has supported since its inception. So you can kind of look through those and get a lot of ideas. But I'm afraid we don't share the literal applications.
Great. And it looks like the program on the 28th would be an opportunity to hear from actual successful collaborations and partnerships in the past.
That's right. Absolutely. And also, if you look, if you search on the website and discover that a friend or friends have received grants in the past, they might be willing to share their materials with you, but we haven't asked their permission to share.
Got it. All right. And this question kept coming up, so I wanted to just address it one more time and point the group in some good direction. So where can I find nonprofits to partner with? We wanted to highlight some of Foundation Center's resources. So Foundation Directory Online, which is one of Foundation Center's products, is a great place to search for potential leads. And we also partner with an organization called GuideStar, where you can search for nonprofits locally. And so that question came up a few times, but Francis, did you want to add anything about where they can potentially find that match?
Ganga, I'm afraid I'm just going to give them a little bit of a steering away bit of advice, and this is not meant to be only to let you know that once an organization or an artist receives a Creative Work Fund grant, they can't get another one for 3 years.
Okay.
So if you look on our website for the Creative Work Fund, you can scan through a whole lot of organizations that artists have worked with, and that too might give you some good ideas. But look at the little project profiles and see when they were funded and make sure it was earlier than 2016.
Okay, that's super helpful. So it sounds like it should be an organic relationship, and the nonprofit should not have been a Creative Work Fund awardee in the last 3 years.
That's right.
All right. Okay, so that was our last question, and I just want to say thank you so much, Francis, for answering all those questions, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. You will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as the handouts and a short survey, and we very much appreciate your feedback as it will help us with future offerings. And if you like today's class, share with us what you learned on social media at GrantSpace, Twitter, at FDN Center, #FCLearn, and also at CWF Collab. And you can also follow us on Instagram and keep in touch with Foundation Center. And on behalf of all of us here, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. We hope that you will join us again in the future. Thank you so much, Francis, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Ganga. And thank you for the great questions, everyone. This was really wonderful.